Our next guest is Ben Cooper, who I have known for years, who is an absolute delight. I'm so glad that you're with us again.
I'm very pleased that you would want me again.
Oh, are you kidding?
Oh, yeah. We have great fun together.
That's because you make it fun.
Is that it?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
You started in show business how long ago?
I think Lincoln was just barely, no, I started in March of 1942 on Broadway in a play called Life with Father. And it was a fluke. Some parents of a boy who'd been in the road company met my parents and me and said, why don't you take Ben in? And long story short, I was polite. I learned the whole part the first week. They gave us the script to read one page, and my dad read it with me, and I was looking around. He said, do you know it? I said, yes. He said, well, let's see. And I did. So my dad was so cool. He said, well, let's see how much else you can learn. And by the time I went in the next week, and I didn't think it was anything special, and I had a way with words, and I learned it, and they walked out, and they said, where's your script? And it was all dark. I couldn't see anybody. And I said, my mother has it. And they said, do you want to go get it? I said, no. They said, why not? I said, I know it. He said, oh, okay. So they gave me the cue for that one page, and I knew it. And they said, what else do you know? I said, I know the whole thing. He said, you do? And I said, yes, sir. I found out later they said to each other, did he say sir? And so I was the right size, I looked right, I was very polite, and I knew the whole part. Guess who got the job? It was that simple. And I loved it. And there were 4 boys in the play, a classic comedy. And I played the youngest for 3 months, a year and 3 months, and then the next to youngest for a year and 9 months. So I was in it for 3 years, 1 week, and 1 day. And I loved every minute of it because I was too young to be afraid of it. Mm. And that's true. Then I went into radio. You remember radio? A little brown thing with buttons.
I loved radio.
No picture.
You had to use your imagination more.
You did, even when you were doing it. And my dad kept the records. So when I went to Columbia University, that's a frightening thought in itself, I wrote a thesis on the history of the soap opera, a 15-minute continuing storyline. Wow. And I had done 44 different ones, and my dad said, this is for your bibliography. And I had done over 3,200 radio shows.
Oh, my word. Ben.
And that was all before 1953, so I was tired, and I came out to California.
Now, did you get into movies first or TV first?
Oh, TV. The first live TV show I did was in May of 1945. Most people didn't have TV sets, but it was fun to do it. And it was called the Brownstone Theater, and the episode was The Heritage of Wimpole Street, about Elizabeth Barrett Browning's son, who comes back and wins over her father who had disowned her when she married Robert Browning.
Wow.
And it was a very good script. And they liked it in New York. It was on in May of 1945. And I know because my mother saved the review. She burned all the bad ones, but she saved that one.
Good for her.
And they liked it so much in New York, we drove up to Schenectady and did the same TV show on a local TV station because they could not send the TV signal over the horizon.
Isn't that wild? I mean, we can't imagine that today when it's all bounced by satellite.
Can you imagine what we would have thought had they tried to tell us about CNN and Fox News, and when an explosion happens in Beirut, 5 minutes later there's a reporter standing in front of the place where it happened and they're telling you all about it and showing you? What would we have thought? And they could have said, in I think it was 29 years from now, when we land a man on the moon, we'll have a split-screen image of the President of the United States on one side and the astronaut on the moon on the other side, and they will talk to each other. What would we have sent for the truck, for the funny farm, for that guy? We wouldn't have believed it because of the frame of reference we had then. So today, when somebody who is experienced in whatever you're trying to do tells you, you'd be great at this, you can really do this, you may not believe them because you don't have the same frame of reference, but don't discount it. It could be true. But that's a lesson I learned from that.
Now, you've kept track of your stats, or your folks did in the beginning. How many projects have you done over the years?
Show business projects? Mm-hmm. I wanted to be sure.
Yes.
I don't know. I think I've done about 30, 35 films and quite a few hundred film TV shows and other things. I got involved in political speaking. I got involved in motivational speaking. I started my own marketing business almost 40 years ago. And that's how I was able to stay home and take care of my wife when she was so ill. Yeah. But it's just, you do what comes along. You deal with it.
With your show business projects, what was your favorite show to do and why?
I loved all of them. I was so fortunate in that my attitude was that they let me play cowboy and they paid me. And I'd ridden horses. I got my own horse when I was 12, and I used to jumping bareback. And I didn't know they had stuntmen, so I'd watch a movie and then I'd go home and practice on my horse till I could do it. Darn near killed myself a few times, but I did have fun. And my mother, I was 14, and my mother came out to the stable because she thought, oh, he'll be through by now. Because I had a day free from doing radio, so I would just spend the time on Gypsy, my horse. And as she came around the curve at a beautiful stable, at the Alley Pond Stable in Long Island, and it was like an English countryside building, beautiful architecture. And as she came around, I was jumping off the roof of the stable onto my horse's back. Well, she almost wrecked the car. I almost wrecked a couple of things myself. But I learned how to do it properly, and it saved my life about twice when I was doing movies, just instinctively knowing what to do. And one was Johnny Guitar. And I got to ride that beautiful horse, Blaze, that Alan Ladd rode in Chain. And we were riding on this red mountains, this rocky shale. And Blaze started to slide. And when a horse starts to slide downhill, normally you aim him downhill and ride it out, just hold his head up. But I couldn't quite do that because the slide went like this, and then there was a 200-foot drop.
Oh.
And he didn't have on sneakers. He didn't have on anything that would really help. So I had to get him back up, and I turned him around. I had the spurs going like mad, and I was up over his head. And when I got him back up, one of the wranglers came over and said, "You're the only rider I know who can ride a horse sitting between his ears." But it was a good moment. And I enjoyed doing that picture very much. I enjoyed everything I did. I just loved it. It was hot, sweaty, and dirty, and I loved every minute of it. But my favorite, I did a Gunsmoke. I did 3 of them, but one of them was called Apprentice Doc. And I studied medicine with Doc Adams. And I had 3 of the most beautifully written scenes with Milburn Stone, who played Doc. And I don't know whether I told you this, Cheryl, but it was the only time I ever wrote a letter to an actor thanking him for the experience of working with him. And I sent it to Millie. And I saw him later that year at a Christmas party. And he just did this and walked across the room, and we hugged. And his wife told my wife that, "Do you know what Millie did with Ben's letter?" And she said, "No, what?" He rearranged his scrapbook and put it on the front page.
Wow.
But working with Milburn Stone was just as if the producer had tucked $100,000 in my pocket and said, "I want you to feel good." You know, it was just a fabulous experience. Working with Joan Crawford was a wonderful experience. She was a great gal. I never want to see the movie Mommy Dearest, and I never read the book that was written by the girl who was left out of the will. How else do you make money on Mama? So, but Joan became a very dear friend. And so, you know, got a lot of good experiences.
You were wonderful in Johnny Guitar.
They hung me.
I was, I think, 13 when I saw that, and I had such a crush on you.
Whee!
And
now I find out.
How dare they hang you?
It was in the script, unfortunately.
I know.
I must tell you, Sammy Davis was a dear friend. And his grandmother was a little teeny tiny round thing, and she was actually his grandmother, but everybody called her Mama. And he took her to see Johnny Guitar at the Palace Theater in New York. And when she found out they were going to hang me, and now they're taking me, got my hands tied behind my back, sitting on the horse, and they're taking me down to this bridge where they're going to hang me. They're in a crowded theater in New York. And Mama started saying, "They can't do that to my man. Don't let them do that to my man." And she's screaming, and Sammy said he got so embarrassed he almost turned white. And he had to literally get up and take her out of the theater because she was so upset. So that upset a lot of people. I didn't like it too much myself. They put a rope on the bridge, and the rope came down, and they had a leather corset on my body underneath the clothing with 6 belts and buckles across here, straps under my crotch, over my shoulder, and the rope was attached to that. And then they had the noose on the rope, and it was just loose on it. And it was around my neck. And then they hit the horse, and the horse went out from under me. Now, I knew the rope was attached to that corset. Mm-hmm. Everybody there knew that. It still felt darn weird.
Oh, I bet.
Really weird. It was very strange. I'd rather not do that again.
Now, being in Westerns and all the other projects, though, I would imagine that that was not the only time that you got killed.
Oh, no. I got killed a lot. My daughter, Kelly, when she was in junior high school, they said, "And what does your father do for a living?" She said, "He dies for a living." And I've been shot so many times, I have a permanent hole right over my belt buckle. You want to see it?
Not today.
But I got, I did gangster stories and, wonderful shows. The old Hallmark and Armstrong Theater of Today, all these kind of things,
They were so great.
And, yeah, I used to love to get shot and fly across the room and everything. That's when I was young and bounceable. Now I just as soon die in my sleep in a movie, Make it a lot easier. But it was fun. It was fun.
Well, a lot of you guys that did the Westerns, you got really good at the quick draw, and I know you are one of the absolute best.
Well, I practiced an hour and a half every day for 4 years.
That's what it takes.
And it's the same thing. Chet Atkins did not play the guitar only when the audience showed up. He would play for hours and nobody there. Frank Sinatra used to spend at least an hour before every show just doing vocals to warm up and loosen up his throat. So everybody finds out what works. I practiced the fast draw at least an hour and a half every day. And I got so I could let you cock an empty gun and point it at me, and if I moved, you just pull the trigger. And I could draw, cock the hammer, and fire before you could pull the trigger. But that was manipulative. I knew when I was going to draw, you didn't. And you had to see me move, react to that, and then pull the trigger, and by that time I had you. So it was a little easier than it was. But one film I did just before I went in the Army. Now there's a frightening thought, me in the Army. I defended the entire free world. I hope you're grateful for that. Yeah. Well, I had my friend Eddie with me. He and I did it together. We made it a project. And when the movie came out, it was called The Outlaw's Son. It was just on the Westerns channel a little while ago. With Dane Clark was the outlaw. I was his son. And in it, we had a fight scene, and I get knocked back against the bar, and they cut to a shot of the other guy with his gun out, and they cut back to me, and my hand was about waist level. And can I stand?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll move slowly for you, because I realize how it can be. Is that all right?
That was neat.
Well, too many times people do this, and they're out of the shot.
Was like, okay.
But anyway, these guns, you have to cock the hammer back. Oh, we found you.
Yes.
You have to cock the hammer back and then pull the trigger. You can't just pull the trigger. People will make fun of you. So the gun, you have to cock the hammer back like that and then hit the trigger on the way out. And so from here to when the gun was out, cocked, and fired was at 24 frames a second through the camera, 24 frames a second through the projector. It was a little under 4 frames, which was a little under 1/6 of a second. That was 55 years ago. So you must keep these in perspective. And this gun, when I went in the Army, I had the openings in the cylinder chambered out to hold automatic ammunition, just hold the brass casing, because the automatic ammunition did not have a collar on the back to keep it from sliding through the cylinder. So that little groove in there, that's still the same cylinder. That held the brass casing and allowed the bullet out. And I still have a few hundred. I could get 100 rounds a day for 50 rounds a day for 50 cents in the Army in the mid-50s. I still have a few hundred rounds. I'm going to sit down now. I don't think I'll do a fast draw because it's not that fast anymore. Anyway.
Still looks pretty good to me.
I haven't had the gun belt on in a year, so I don't practice all the time now.
Yeah. Who was your favorite director?
Oh, wow. Harry Harris. He was the kind to tell you what he kind of wanted the end result to be, but he let you try to reach for it and do it. And he did the most wonderful thing. Millie and I had 6 scenes of me wanting to study medicine with him and him explaining about the advances in medicine are because of the war. And I say, the war? He said, oh, yes. When death is all around you, one life can become so important. And you learn to try beyond yourself. And he was explaining that because of the war, many advances came about in medicine, same thing today. Well, these 6 scenes, he kept them for the last 2 days. And he kept 2 hot sets. Now, this is very rare. A hot set is when they leave it exactly as it was when it was established, and it's like the yellow tape for a police scene, crime scene. And they put that around it, and nobody is supposed to go in there and touch anything, so it will match. As if somebody's going to be wondering, that book wasn't there last time. But they do that. And then the last 2 days, Millie and I got to do those scenes in sequence. But 3 or 4 days before that, when we were doing all the action stuff, we'd have coffee, and I'd say, do you want to run lines? And he knew all his lines for the scenes, and so did I. And we rehearsed 5 of the 6. We never rehearsed the last one, because that's where I died. And we didn't want to rehearse that one. And so Harry let us do these scenes in sequence. And it was just heaven to work with an actor like Millie Stone. It was he just would look right through you, and he was so real. And we finally had to do that last scene where I'd been gut shot. And I'm going to die because I wasn't listed for the following week. So anyway, Millie comes in where I've been shot, and he kneels down beside me, and I start repeating all the things he taught me. Keep the wound clean, do this, do that. And I said, you have all the answers. He said, I don't have any answers for you, Pitt. My name was Pitt in the show. And finally, the moment came when I had to die. And I really didn't want to die. I wanted to stay with him. And I grabbed his hand, and I said, Doc. And they wouldn't let you do an open-eyed death on TV in those days. I think now you can have anything open. But anyway, I didn't really mean it that way. But, and anyway, I grabbed his hand, and I said, Doc, and then I died. And he was kneeling there, and, Millie with that wipe his mustache, and he just reached over and got his hat, put his hat on. He's looking at me and patting my hand. And he picked up his medical bag and started out. And all that time I could feel his tears landing on my hand.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, I must explain something to you all. My wife passed away a little over a year ago. And I have a dear friend up in Oregon, Wright King, a wonderful actor. And his wife died 3 months after Pamela. And we talk quite often. And I said to him about a month and a half ago, I said, Wright, how are you doing? He said, well, my blubber bar has been lowered considerably. And it's true, your emotions are, right? I almost lost it just talking about Millie. But so the emotion is pretty close to the edge, so forgive me if I get a little silly.
Now it's time for you to ask questions.
Uh-oh.
Yes, sir.
Do you ever feel kind of typecast to play a young gunfighter who's over anxious and ends up shot in the street?
No, I was always typecast as the young man. Sometimes I was the gunfighter, sometimes I wasn't very good at it, and sometimes I wore a suit and a tie just like a grown-up. To this day, when I put on a suit and a tie, I call it my grown-up costume when I have a business meeting. But I was fortunate, but because of my face, you know, Clarence Clean-Cut, Neville Nice, Wendell Warm, and Larry Likeable was basically the... We used to joke, I got all of those, hello, Mom, hi, sis, downspot parts. I enjoyed playing the bad guy the most because I knew I didn't particularly look like a bad guy, although way down deep inside I am. But
just ornery.
I thought it would be more frightening for the audience if the audience knew I was a bad guy, but the other people in the show, supposedly their characters did not know. And the audience say, watch out for him, he's going to kill you. I played a killer on the old live TV show Suspense. I killed people with a hunting knife. I loved that shit. Robert Horton was the good guy in it.
Yes, sir.
Oh, you mentioned that movie, Johnny Guitar. Can you tell us a little bit about, talk a little bit about that movie in terms of where it was filmed? It had a very, very strong cast. Maybe some of your interactions with some of the cast members.
Sure, thank you. We made it, the location was in Sedona, Arizona. And beautiful, beautiful country. And wonderful people there. And it was Joan Crawford and Sterling Hayden, Ward Bond, Scott Brady, Mercedes McCambridge, Ernest Borgnine, Royal Dano. Scott Brady, Royal Dano, Ernie Borgnine, and I were in a gang together. And I had a ball. There were a lot of rumors about a little difficulty between Mercedes McCambridge and Joan Crawford. And when we got back from Arizona to California, somebody said, well, I've been hearing stories, you know, how did it go down there? I said, well, we had to stop shooting for 3 days. They said, really? What happened? I said, well, we had to send to New Mexico for some more scenery because Mercedes chewed it all up. And if you have ever seen the movie, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. She was going for a particular thing, and I felt she overdid it. Now, years later, she wrote a book claiming that she had been an alcoholic. So that could have been a problem then. You got to give everybody their due. I don't know. But I did a wardrobe test scene with Joan Crawford a month before we shot the picture. And then I had done a few hundred radio shows with Mercedes in New York. Joan became a very good friend. Great sense of humor. Mommy Dearest was not the Joan Crawford that I knew. And if she was your friend, you had a loyal friend. And almost a year after we made the film, my dad came out from Long Island to visit me. And Army Archer wrote in his column that I was showing my dad around Hollywood, which is true. Not all around Hollywood, but quite a bit. And Joan called me, and she said, why didn't you tell me your father was in town? I said, I didn't know. I had to check in. And she said, well, how long will he be here? I said, he's going home Saturday. She said, when on Saturday? I said, Saturday night. She said, Ben, would he like to come to my house for dinner on the way to the airport? My dad was from Boston, Massachusetts. He went to MIT, automotive engineering, and then he taught there. Would he like to go to Joan Crawford's house for dinner? Duh. I took her there. She cooked the dinner. She served the dinner. And while we were sitting there, Dad was so sorry he'd said it, but he said, oh, I wish Berna could be here. It's her birthday. That's my mom. Joan said, what's your phone number? Dad told her, Flushing 9, 3498. I even remember it to this day. She called the number and said, Berna, this is Joan Crawford. I'm sitting here with two handsome men, and they tell me it's your birthday. Happy birthday, hon. My mom almost fainted. And she talked for a while, then she turned the phone over to my dad, over to me, then said goodbye to her and hung up. My dad could have bitten his tongue off. He said, "Oh, I should have told her to turn on the tape recorder." They had just bought one of those great big reel-to-reel tape recorders, you know. It takes 2 men and a boy to carry them into the room. And Joan said, "What's your phone number?" Did it again. "Berna, this is Joan again. Turn on the tape recorder, hon. I'll wait." Mom turned on the tape recorder. She went through the whole thing again and hung up. When we were finished and ready to leave, she gave my dad a vase. Now, a vase is cheap. A vase is not. This is green glass with beautiful little bubbles in there, and like this, full of champagne for my dad to drink on the way to the airport. Now, I don't think my dad needed the plane to fly home, and it wasn't the champagne. Do you think you could get me to tell you anything bad about Joan Crawford? Not on your life. No. What she did for my dad was just the most precious thing she could have done. And she knew it. She knew what effect it would have, and she was just great that way and handled it beautifully. So, there's an experience that most people don't get.
Yeah. Anybody else with a question?
Yes, sir.
I understand that Sterling Hayden was a real kind of a rebel. What was your impression of him when you worked with him?
I did 3 pictures with Sterling. Johnny Guitar was the first one. And then a year later, we did The Last Command about the Alamo, and then a Navy picture. Sterling had been a real hero in World War II. He was a Marine, and his theater of operations was the European theater. He was sailing arms and ammunition behind the German lines to the Yugoslavian patriots. And at 6'5", he had to wear his Marine uniform, or if he was caught, he'd be shot as a spy. And so he was sailing arms, and he had been a great sailor. He'd sailed around the world twice. Mm-hmm. And he was sailing arms and ammunition in, and all these Yugoslavian patriots were communists. And they were his buddies. They were his allies. And he told a story about one little old guy. Sterling came down in the cabin of his ship, and the guy was standing in front of a mirror, and he had a shoulder holster on, and he was standing there going. And Sterling came in and he said, "Me, cowboy." So when Sterling got back to the U.S., he joked about this. He said, "I think I was the only person to buy a $40,000 yacht and join the Communist Party in the same day."
Wow.
And then he found out the sagacity of Ronald Reagan, who said, "Communist has read Karl Marx. A conservative understood Karl Marx." And when he understood what the communists were really after, he quit publicly and admitted that he had been a member, and he quit them and testified against them. So they called him a rebel because he decided not to side with the people who at that time were shooting us in Korea. I don't call that a rebel. As he got older, I think he got on some stuff that were not good for him. But hell of a man.
Okay, there was another question. Yes, sir.
How was it working with Mr. King Clark?
I tell you, a bundle of energy. This man had an intensity. The movie was just on a few weeks ago, and I watched a little bit of it. And he had such an intensity about him, and very athletic, very strong. And we had a pretty good fight scene in it. And he's pretty strong guy. But very good actor. Again, a very underrated actor. Nobody talked about what a good actor he was. He just was there, did his job, and went home and got it done exactly right. And he still had that slight New York accent. I don't think he ever lost it. But he was quite cordial and very easy to work with. He was there. He knew all his lines. He was glad that you knew yours, and we got along fine. Great guy.
We've got time for one last question.
Oh, make it a goodie. Yes,
Yes,
sir.
How about Brian Keith? We made that Westerners episode with Brian Keith and Mike Mansara, and of course you ended up dead in the street again, but it was great.
That was called The Hand on the Gun. I did a Zane Grey Theater for Sam Peckinpah with Vera Miles. Be Still My Heart. And it was a pretty good script, and I did a little bit of gun work in it. And Sam said to me afterwards, he said, I'm going to write a show for you. I said, that'd be nice. But I didn't go home and write it in my Bible. Sam Peckinpah was going to write it, you know. And about 9 months later, he called my agent's office when I was in the office. And my agent said, yeah, he's right here. You want to talk to him? And gave me the phone, and it was Sam. He said, remember I told you I was going to write a story for you? I said, yeah. I said, well, I didn't write it, but I gave the storyline to Bruce Geller, and I asked him to write it. And we want you to do a Westerner with Brian Keith. Well, there were actors all over Southern California lined up, ready to kill anyone they had to in order to get on the Westerner with Brian. They only made 13 of them. And Brian was so good to work with, and such a good actor. And I said to him, I worked with him on quite a few shows, and I said, do you have any particular style? He said, well, you just kind of work past it, you know, you just kind of work past it. And so Sam was the only, Stella and I talked about the fact, Sam was the only director who ever really kept his word to me. Many times directors say, I'm going to use you in the next picture, Ben, but they say the same thing to 30 other people. And then when they go to cast the picture, they think, who did I say I was going to use? Maybe it's the last one they said it to. I don't know. But Sam kept his word. And it was a wonderful script. And it was a smarty-pants kid from the East who got fast with a gun and came out. And Michael and Sarah killed me. But we didn't draw against each other. He just came out with a gun in his hand, and I, in my excitement, cut the gun out and popped off 2 shots, and he just went bam. And I died in that one, too. So...
Well, you died so gracefully.
Well, when I taught Sunday school for a little while, and I used to teach the kids that if they watch old movies, they can see me get killed during the week, and then I show up on Sunday morning, and it just shows eternal life goes on and on. There is no death.
Thank you so much, John.
This is the sweetest, kindest, nicest, most revered and loved woman in our entire industry.
Oh.
That's true, and she's so young to have that title. But she really is. She is, what you see is what you get. And you all are lucky to even watch her or know her.
Oh, bless your heart.